Okay, everyone, we are going to get started. Let me just turn my camera on, and in a minute you will also see our presenter, Dr. Martha Merchant. Before we begin that, just let me welcome everyone here to our SPP-TAP webinar. That's the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project. My name is Connie Silva-Broussard, the director of that project, and I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Martha Merchant in just a minute, but first I just quickly want to tell you a little bit about our project. And I should let you know before we begin that we are recording this webinar. As we always do, we want to make sure that people are able to view this later, whether you were here with us and want to review something that you saw, or if you want to share this with other people that weren't able to attend today. We like to have them archived, and they are actually on our website, which you will notice is one of the things on this particular screen. Our SPP-TAP.org website is one of the services we have available to folks to learn more about the issues of disproportionality and equity in education. The other things that we have as part of our project is we have a community of practice, and that is specific to districts that have been identified as significantly disproportionate. Some of you, I know, are members of that team or have been in the past. We also provide, as we are today, webinars that are open to anyone interested in topics that are related to this. And as I said, we archive our webinars. So if there are other webinars that you're interested in viewing or just wondering what we've done before, feel free to visit the website, and you can get a list there and view them at your own leisure. We can provide technical assistance on topics related to this, whether you are disproportionate or not, and just have issues that you would like to get some resources or help around. My email address is there on the screen, and at the end of this you'll also notice we have phone numbers and email addresses as well. So feel free to contact us at any time, and we will do our best to help you. Okay. So I want to get to Dr. Martha Merchant because we have a lot of information for her to share for you. So let me tell you, Dr. Martha Merchant is a licensed psychologist. She's currently working as a consultant with the University of California, San Francisco HEARTS program, and that stands for Healthy Environment and Response to Trauma in Schools, and that's part of Project Prevent. Project Prevent's goal is to increase a school's capacity both to identify, assess, and serve students exposed to pervasive violence, helping to ensure that affected students are offered mental health services for trauma or anxiety, support conflict resolution groups, and implement other school-based violence prevention strategies in order to reduce the likelihood that these students will later commit violent acts. And in her role, she provides training and consultation and support for adult members of the student's caregiving system. So that includes teachers, school staff, parents, and guardians, and so on. And with the intent to create more trauma-sensitive, safe, and supportive school environments. And this right now is currently in 7 schools in the Bayview District. And previously, she was a clinician with UCSF and working directly in El Dorado Elementary School, also in Bayview. So you might hear some of her experience in that school in particular. But with that, Martha, if you could go ahead and put your camera on, I will pass it on to you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Martha.
Hi, thanks everybody for being here. So as Connie said, that I started with HEARTS 4 years ago, and I was embedded at that time at El Dorado Elementary School. Here at San Francisco Unified, and I'm currently working in 7 schools. It's still HEARTS, Healthy Environments and Response to Trauma in Schools, but I don't do any direct care anymore, direct services. I do only training and consultation. So as we're getting started, I just want to start by saying this is really just a taste of transforming trauma. As you know, we have 70 minutes. What I do, what I consider the basic transforming trauma presentations for San Francisco Unified, it's 3 full days long. So just so you realize that this is just a taste, this is just getting started. This is a webinar, my first webinar, and this new technology is so amazing because we can reach so many more people who might not be able to do it if this were an in-person session. And so that new technology is fantastic, and I want to just acknowledge that it has some drawbacks also. Trauma is a tough topic to talk about, and when I do this in person, I get a lot of feedback from the audience. I'm watching people's faces. I am sort of checking in how people are doing. I know when I need to slow down, or if I can tell someone, I see that you have a question just by the look on their faces. And so really I'm asking you to use the chat box that's there on your left-hand side to comment, to put question marks if you're not understanding what I'm talking about. I might not answer at that moment, but I might be able to say we're going to get to that soon. Just so that I don't feel quite so alone while I'm standing here. All right. And at the end there is time for questions, so that's also there for you also. Okay. So why is a trauma-informed approach important to me? I just want you all to think for a moment about the last 7 days, and if you've had zero stress in the last 7 days, like just comment in the box that you've had zero stress in the last 7 days. Or if you've had zero stress in the last 3 days, or maybe even just today. So we'll talk a lot about trauma and stress today, but I want to tell you first why I do what I do and why I do this in schools. So when I was growing up, I was an Army brat. And I don't know what it's like now, but back when I was an Army brat, what that meant was that we moved a lot, that we changed schools, and I attended all of my early education overseas in Army schools, not military schools, but schools on Army bases. And back in the day, at that time, Army schools were very good schools. They were essentially private schools. The Army paid teachers a lot of money to fly overseas. That was kind of before it was cool to go overseas to teach. And so it was a very flexible approach to education. It was very forward-thinking. And I was, like in the 3rd grade, I was like an amazing reader, and so they put me into like some kind of a literature class. Like that's the kind of education I was getting. And then we moved back to the United States, and I was super excited because when we left the United States, I was very little, and so for me it was kind of like my first time to the United States, and I was really excited, and I was like, oh, this is going to be so great. These are going to be my people, because as you might imagine, in the military, in a school on the military base, there were kids from all different countries, and that was kind of there was a nationalism thing, like the Americans versus the Brits versus the French. Anyway, so I was super excited to be going back to my people. I was going to learn to speak another language, and everybody was going to be just like me. And meanwhile, I moved to Augusta, Georgia. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the South, but at the time, Georgia was number 2 at the bottom of the top schools in the country, and my flexible approach and forward thinking about education was not appreciated. That's great. So we have another Army brat in the audience. That's awesome. So in the 6th grade, I regularly had this teacher who told the whole class how sad she was that she couldn't paddle me, because my mom wouldn't sign that paper that says they can paddle you. 11 states in the country still allow paddling as a form of discipline. And so when I quit school, 3 credits short of a high school diploma, I was done. I did not like school. School didn't like me. I hated school. I was never going back, and I went on to an illustrious career in fast food, as people do, and without a high school diploma. So I did fast food, and then I became a nanny. And while I was working as a nanny, the kids got older, as they do, and the youngest was getting ready to go to full-day school, and my boss and also my friend at that time came to me and said, you know, Martha, I think you should start thinking about doing something else. I don't know if we really need a full-time person in the house. And I was like, no, I really like what I'm doing. This is what I want to do. And she was like, you know, you're smart. Maybe you should think about going back to school. And I said, no, school is stupid. I hate school. So some more time passed. And I think maybe when she was registering the kid for school, she said, listen, here's the deal. You can either go back to school or pay rent here, get a job, because I was living in. And I was really mad about that. I was kind of like, oh, I left home early because I didn't want anybody to tell me what to do. And so I went out the next day and I did both. I went out and got a job, Wendy's, and enrolled in community college, who were the only people who would take me in the moment without any documentation of who I was or where I came from. And so I went to community college, and while I was in community college, I discovered I enjoyed school. I liked reading. I liked learning new things. I liked talking about new ideas. And while I was taking the basic liberal arts courses, I took like a Psych 101 class. And the professor was an adjunct professor who during the day was a drug and alcohol counselor. And so he would tell us, like, this is a theory, and this is how it related to a client of mine. I once had a client who, or I heard of a client who. And so he would spend time, so I remember sitting at the back of the classroom, because That's where you sit if you think you're a bad student. I was sitting at the back of the classroom and suddenly realizing that what he was talking about was something that I could do as a living. Believe me, nobody in Augusta, Georgia ever said to me, oh, Martha, one day you could be a counselor. One day you could be a psychologist. That was not on the program for me. So I would talk to him after class, like, how did you get to be a counselor? Why do you do what you do? What kind of school did you have to take? And it's really because that teacher who took the time to talk to me after classes and the friend who threatened to kick me out, that I went back to school, that I am doing today the work that I love. And I work in schools not because this is the highest rate of pay going, but because this is where we have such a tremendous impact on children. Kids are in school sometimes 50, 55 hours a week. And if everyone at school says, you're a rotten kid that can't learn, that has a very, very strong impact on all of us, on any of us. Okay, so that's why I do what I do. Heart says, what's the word I'm looking for? Has organized. Heart has organized these are trauma-informed principles into these 6 categories. Where's my doohickey? And so you'll see they're here, all 6 of them. And like I said, this is just a taste, and so we are not going to go through all 6 categories. Well, we're going to go through all 6 categories, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each category because we don't have the time to do that. But I just want you to notice that all these things we're talking about are we're not just talking about kids. I'm talking also about leadership, staff, students, and families. Like, this is an integrated approach. All right. So we're going to start with understanding trauma and stress. And the first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little story. I'm actually going to read you a story because this way I don't get any of the details wrong. All right. Arvin is a 2nd grade boy. In the morning, he arrived 45 minutes late to school. His teacher asked him for his homework. When Arvin didn't have it, she expressed frustration with him and told him she would be texting his mother. As Arvin made his way to his desk, another student bumped into him. Arvin shoved the student away. His teacher shouted at him to stop. Arvin yelled at the teacher, swearing at her and clenching his fist. His teacher moved towards him, still talking, and Arvin began screaming and backed up to a table at the back of the room, crawling underneath. After 10 minutes of trying to extract Arvin from the classroom, Arvin was brought to the office, kicking an adult in the process. He was then suspended for 2 days for his behavior. So I always have to take a deep breath. Let's pause for a moment, and I want you to think about if that's a thing that could ever happen in a school that you've ever worked in. All right. Let's talk about trauma and stress. Yes, thanks for commenting. Okay. Stress affects our performance. All of us, this is not about bad people or bad things. This is about all of us. Stress is something that we all have. That's right. Jeff Duncan Andrade says the only people on the planet without stress are in the graveyard, right? All of us have some stress. So I'm going to tell you, my beloved pet, my dog of 10 years, passed away almost a year now, last August. And so on the day that he passed away, someone called me and asked me to do a presentation. And then that was a Tuesday. On Friday, that person called me back and said, hey, Dr. Martha, I wanted to get your information. You said you were going to send me a bio and something. And I was kind of like, who is this person? But I didn't say that. I said, yes, could you email me something? That way I know I have the right email. If you email me, I'll email you back. And so she said, great. And she emailed me. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I went right to my phone list and looked. And I saw that I had had a conversation with this woman on Tuesday and had spoken to her for 10 minutes. Right? So I talked to her for 10 minutes and agreed to do a presentation. Right? So while I was talking to her, it wasn't like I was sobbing and she realized that something was going on. It wasn't like, to her, I seemed perfectly reasonable and was making this conversation and was having this conversation without any difficulty. But really, my stress level was so high, you'll see over here on the right-hand side, that I actually wasn't taking that in, right? Although I sounded like I was. It looked to her like I was, right? So depending on our level of stress will depend on how we show up in the universe, right? Some stress is actually good for performance. It helps us to remember better. It helps us to focus. And it helps us to, there are three things, focus, memory, and something else which I'm not remembering right now. So some stress is actually good for performance. It's good for our learning. And too much can keep us from being able to learn. And too little can keep us from being able to learn. Okay. Stress and trauma are also a public health issue. They're linked to the 6 leading causes of death. You have them on your handouts. I forgot to mention the handouts. You guys have your handouts there. Yes, that's right, Maureen. Heart disease, cancer, lung ailments, accidents, cirrhosis of the liver, and suicide. It impacts more than just the individual. And some communities are disproportionately affected. Bigotry, urban poverty, and trauma are a toxic mix. And sometimes there's a multi-generational history of trauma. Whenever I talk about this slide, I always think of Geary Boulevard and how in the 50s and 60s, the city decided that there was a blight on the city. They wanted to change that area and make it more, thank you, Jen, make it more commercial. The city describes that as, the paperwork describes the blight on the city as too many people of color in one neighborhood. And so what they did was they tore down these houses to build up other stuff and put, they put, I'm sorry. Okay, so they raised the houses to widen the boulevard, and they put people out of those houses, giving them a voucher saying, when this is all done, you can come back and get you a new house in this neighborhood. And for now, we'll just have you stay in these government-subsidized housing. Actually, in the 60s, they requested special houses to be built, and the city agreed to build those houses, but then the city didn't build them, and they said you can just stay in the government-subsidized housing for now. And, 3 generations, some of those families are still there because it's really hard to recuperate from the city took your house. And most of those families were middle-class African-American families, more than 60%. And so those are the people still living, in some cases, in our government-subsidized housing around the city. And that's why we say a systemic preventative approach is needed. All right, so trauma, like I said, is a tough topic to talk about, but this is the story of hope. So these are all people who lived through trauma in their childhood and went on to change the world in amazing ways. Please, anybody who recognizes anybody, put that in the chat box here on your left. Name anyone you recognize in this picture. Oprah Winfrey, absolutely. Here she is, little Oprah. Who else do we recognize? I feel like I kind of get the age of my audience as I'm doing this. Billy Clinton, that's right. Look at him, he's really cute. Who else do we have? Obama, that's right. This is Obama up here. He doesn't call what he went through trauma, but we know that he had separation from a parent. Yes, John Lennon, absolutely. I'm going to give you this one for free because no one ever guesses it's Gloria Steinem. Here we have the first Latina female Supreme Court justice. Someone knows. Sotomayor, right. Here we have, she's a singer. She was super famous back in the day, and now she's not an American citizen anymore. She was married to a really angry husband. No. Tina Turner, absolutely. And right here we have passed away just in the last year. This is, wait, one more person is typing. Maya Angelou, that's right. All right, so these people, I think we can agree, all went on to do amazing things. So really, I'm not saying that trauma is a bad thing and no one can ever recover. Okay, so understanding trauma and stress. This is our first principle. Learning about the psychology, the psychobiology of stress and toxic stress and trauma is liberating for people. It gives us explanatory reasons for some of the puzzling behaviors that we engage in and feelings that can come over us and dominate us. That's from Bloom. So I like to say that it gives us an aha moment, and this is one of those times where I wish I could see your faces, because some of you will remember aha and some of you will not. But I don't mean that kind of aha. I mean this kind of aha. It helps us, like I said, to understand why people are doing the things around us, and this gives us a place to kind of hang our hat so that we can make a decision about what we're going to do moving forward. The traditional approach says, what is wrong with Arvin? Going back to our story, right? He's swearing at people, he's screaming, he's hitting adults. And likewise, what's wrong with his teacher? She's yelling at him, she's got her hand up, right? I'm hoping that that's not her number one classroom management strategy. What we're really asking people to do at Hearts, if you don't remember anything else that I'm talking about today, is to shift your perspective from what is wrong with you to one that asks, what has happened to you? This provides context, fosters compassion, and allows us to see strengths in the face of adversity. So I'm going to tell you the story again. We're going to find out what has happened to Arvin. This time I'm going to include the details that you didn't hear the first time around. And I want you to engage in a thought experiment with me. What I want you to do is I want you to pretend you're holding a bottle of soda in your hand. And as I read the story, every time you hear another stressor, I want you to shake the bottle, right? Okay, I'm going to read this part also. Arvin is a second-grade boy from a highly under-resourced neighborhood where he frequently hears gunshots and where a man was shot by a police officer recently. He has been witnessing domestic violence at a neighbor's house since he was very small. One night, through the front window, Arvin saw the neighbors in a huge fight, went inside, told his mother he was worried. She called the police, and they waited inside together for the police to come. When the police showed up, the fight was already over, but they spoke to the neighbors. When they left, the neighbor came to their apartment yelling at the mother, saying that she knew it was Arvin's mother who had made the call and that she would make sure the migra knows where they live. In the morning, Arvin was afraid to go to school, leaving his mother alone. He finally left after her promising him that she would stay away from the house that day. Arvin went to school not knowing how to check in with his mother because the family had lost their cell phone. When he arrived at school, his teacher, who didn't know about Arvin's traumatic experiences, asked him for his homework. When he didn't have it, she expressed frustration at him and told him she would be texting his mother. As Arvin made his way to his desk, another student bumped into him. Already to some degree triggered into a heightened state of vigilance and preparation for defense against threats, or survival mode, this physical contact fully triggered Arvin into a fight-flight reaction, and he shoved the other student away. His teacher, naturally upset by this outburst, shouted at him to stop, which further escalated him. Arvin yelled back at the teacher, swearing at her and clenching his fist. His teacher moved toward him, still talking, and Arvin began screaming and backed up to a table at the back of the room, crawling underneath. After 10 minutes of trying to extract Arvin from the classroom, during which time his teacher felt helpless and defeated, and the other children in the classroom could only look on in fear and frustration, Arvin was brought to the principal's office, kicking an adult in the process. He was then suspended for 2 days for his behavior, inadvertently exposing him not only to a loss of instructional time, but also to a period of time where he would have no refuge from the trauma and suffering in his home life. I always have to take a deep breath after the story. I just want to say that none of the stories that I tell are stories about individual kids, but stories about compilations of kids that we've known. What about what has happened to his teacher? So she teaches in the school where Arvin lives, in the neighborhood where Arvin lives, and she's had a lot of fights and arguments break out over the last 2 weeks. The school has been on lockdown several times this year. She still has to do teacher things. And as the newest teacher on the block, she's also the first and most likely to receive a pink slip if that's going to happen. Again, as we talked about before, stress affects our performance. So imagine that Arvin made it into the classroom, that there was no trouble, like he had his homework or she didn't ask him, and he managed to get to his desk without anybody interfering with that. He managed to sit down at his desk. Was he then at an optimal level of stress for learning? imagining that he didn't have any fights or pushing or yelling. I'm going to wait for you guys to comment. No, right? He was not. He was somewhere over here. He might not have been all the way here yet, but he was definitely not at an optimal level for learning. And so that is something that we want to think about when our kids walk in the door. Often people tell me, oh, that kid went from 0 to 60 in no time. But if a kid comes in and they're already at 45, it's really quite a short distance to go. Okay. So this is your autonomic nervous system, right? There's the brakes and the accelerator. So the accelerator goes into play when you are being chased, for instance, by a saber-toothed tiger. Your breathing increases, your pupils dilate, your heart beats faster, your stomach stops digesting food because you don't need to digest food while you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, right? And the blood goes to your extremities so that you can run faster. And then when you escape the saber-toothed tiger, your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And it allows your heart rate to go back down, your stomach can go back to digesting food. And when they're healthy, those two systems, which is really just two sides of one system, work together very well. And they balance each other out. So for example, if I'm running to catch the bus and my accelerator gets activated, I get a burst of energy, I race up, I get on the bus, and when I catch the bus, I sit down and my parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and I'm able to slow down and go on to digest my food. But what happens when it goes out of whack? So here we have two animals. If we hook them up to electrodes and things, they would have similar high heart rate, right? But neither one of them is digesting anything at the moment, all those same readings, right? But one of them views this as a challenge and one of them views this as a threat. We're clear on which one is which, right? Everybody recognizes that Joe, I like to call him Joe. I don't know what kind of an animal this is. Sometimes people give me options of what they think it is, but I just call it Joe. So Joe, at this moment, sees this as a threat, right? Where this guy sees it as a challenge. When it goes out of whack is when those threats happen repeatedly. So in this case, how many times in his lifetime does Joe get chased like this, up close and personal, the way he's being chased here? I know people watch Animal Planet. How often does it happen that a little animal like this gets chased at this level of intensity? Daily. That's a good guess. Thank you for participating. Except I don't think it's actually daily, right? Because it doesn't look like it's going to end well for Joe. All right? Up close and personal like this is probably only going to happen once. So we think about what predators do. They chase an entire herd until what happens? One animal gets pulled off to the side. Maybe it's too slow. Maybe it's sick. Maybe it's young. Right? It's so sad. So right now, the rest of Joe's herd is over here somewhere relaxing. Sorry, the camera is like the opposite way. Over there somewhere relaxing, right? They are chilling out somewhere. They are saying, oh, I'm so sorry, so sad for Joe, but I'm just going to go back to eating, because their parasympathetic nervous systems kicked in because they know they're not in danger anymore. But what would happen if Joe was chased over and over and over again like this? Eventually what would happen is that it would show in his system. He would have breakdowns in his system because we're not actually made to withstand that kind of threat. So a threat really is when our perceived resources are less than our perceived stressors. This is a slide that I totally stole from Duncan Andrade, and he talks about these. This is the normal stress response, and he talks about high school kids, and he says, oh, this is first period, second period, third period, fourth period, right? So as kids are moving from class to class, their stressors go up. But I like to point out this one over here. It's down in the bottom left-hand corner. So when this happens over time, at some point, for some people, the stress response gets prolonged. It gets kind of stuck up here in the high the high response, right? So this is the kid that's always looking around, always waiting for the next thing to happen. And sometimes for other kids, other people, it gets stuck kind of in the low. And so it's like nothing that you can do to me is going to elicit a response because I've been too high, too long, and I can't sustain that. So this is just how it can show up in different kids at different times, different people, not just children. So trauma, toxic stress, average childhood experiences, these are all kind of things that are going around right now as, that everybody's talking about, and they're very similar. But what we're talking about today is complex trauma. So trauma is an event, an experience, and an effect, right? So let's think about Arvin and his story. The event, which is an actual or extreme threat of harm, so actual harm or a threat of harm. When Arvin was watching the arguing going down, at that moment, he wasn't actually in danger. In fact, even when the woman came to the door and said, I'm going to set the migra on you, at that moment, he wasn't actually being harmed, right? It was just the threat of harm. And so then there's this fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And the experience really is that you're helpless to escape. There's nothing he could do. The best he could do was really to ask his mother not to stay home so that the migra wouldn't find her there, right? And this overwhelms the brain and body, which leads to disintegration and dysregulation, and that can have lasting adverse effects. So complex trauma are multiple traumatic events that often occur in the home. So even when we think about the story of Arvin, his home life is good and warm and caring, but what's going on around him in his neighborhood, because he lives in government subsidized housing, for example, is that stuff is going on around him often enough in a place where it's supposed to be safe and supportive, that it creates this complex trauma. Luckily, we share the same neurobiology. Neurons that fire together wire together. This is Hebb's rule. So this idea that when we're learning new things, neurons are actually firing, and when we learn new things, that firing gets easier. So if you're learning to play an instrument, for example, in the beginning you have to think about every single thing you do, every movement of your fingers, everything that takes some concentration. But as you get better, this part gets easier, and now maybe you can focus your concentration on more subtle parts of playing your instrument. What happens is that the neurons actually fire better. They fire together better, and so that becomes easier, which is great if you're learning to play a new instrument, and not so great if what you're learning is trauma. So I don't know how many of you recognize this object. It's hard to tell because I can't see any of you, so I don't know how many people recognize that. But that is a record player, and what's on the record player is a vinyl record. Yes, sometimes they're in the museum. Okay, so, no, just kidding. I heard that hipsters are bringing them back. So, there's hope for us yet. So that is a vinyl record, and it has grooves on it where the songs are. And so if you're listening to your favorite song, you put the needle on the record and play your favorite song 10,000 times, Mr. Roboto, what actually happens on the record is that the groove gets deeper. And so if you're listening to the rest of the album and you're dancing around and you bump into the table, what will happen is that the needle will skip back to the deepest groove on the record. If you've made that groove super deep, it could also happen that when the needle gets to the end of the song, it skips back to the beginning of the song, right? Which, again, is great if you're listening to Mr. Roboto, but it's not so great if what you're hearing is the fear song. So what can happen is that we go into survival mode at that point, right? That being kicked into the fear song is like being kicked into the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. So this is a very simple picture of your brain, of a brain. And what it has is there the prefrontal cortex. Oh, that's not what I'm supposed to do. Here it is. You have your prefrontal cortex in the front, and then the emotional brain, the limbic system in the back here. So I'm going to have you do this. This is something that Dan Siegel does. It's the brain in your hand. So this part here is the brain stem. I can't see. And if you fold your thumb into your hand and then wrap your fingers down. So you fold your thumb into your hand. This is your the amygdala. And then when you fold your fingers down over the front, that is your prefrontal cortex, right? And so you can see that it's touching all three parts. It's touching the brainstem and the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex together, and they can make really good decisions when everything is working this way. But what happens when you flip your lid or your frontal lobe essentially goes offline, right? So the analogy that we use at Hearts comes from Bessel van der Kolk, and we use the rider off the horse. So this is your rider. It makes logical decisions based on information and clear thinking, right? It rides up high, it can see into the distance, it can kind of get context, so it's like, oh, there's a thing happening over there, so I'm going to direct myself this way. And then this is the horse, and the horse makes decisions based on protective instincts and on emotion. And when a rider and a horse are working together, they can do amazing things. This is a 6-year-old or 7-year-old winning the barrel race championship back in last year. But sometimes the rider goes off the horse. So I love this picture. Lots of people don't like it because, as they say, it's triggering, but we won't be here long. So I just want you to notice that here up at the top corner here, that you see there is the white of the horse's eyes. That is a freaked out horse, right? So I don't actually spend a lot of time around horses, but does it look like it's going to go well for the horse here? Does this look like a good plan for him or her? I don't know if it's a him or her. Yeah, it is not going to end well for this horse. Landing on your back is not actually good for a horse. So, but at the moment that this is happening, does the horse care at all about how he's about to land? I'm hoping people are saying no. I can't tell because nobody's chatting. All right, so no, the horse doesn't care. The horse does not give a hoot about how it's landing at this moment. Which is something to think about. If your rider is off your horse, you don't care about what are the consequences and that you might get suspended and that the teacher is telling you a thing, right? I also like this because I like to point out that this guy that's going down here, also not particularly well, is a professional, right? And though we're talking about kids today, grown-ups also go off their horses. So the first thing really to do is get your own rider back on the horse. So we want to think about aggravating behavior is a cause for a pause. This came from an educator at SFUSD. And be able to ask ourselves what is happening here so that we remember that behavior has meaning. We might also need help. Sometimes you need an extra set of stairs or someone else who can give you a hand on that. The trauma-informed system really, it takes care of everyone in the system. We're not just talking about what do we do for these poor children. We're talking about how do we take care of everyone in the system so that everyone can do better and feel better. All right, we are going to do a quick brain break. This is a belly breathing brain break. It's a basic kind of simple thing that all the kids at El Dorado know how to do and at most of my schools, in fact. And so we start with a slow breath out through the mouth so that we're emptying the chest and then the belly, and then a slow breath in through the nose so that we fill our chest with air. So I'm going to just ask you to do it with me. I like to ask people to make a little sound as they're doing it so that we know we're doing it. And then into the nose. The reason we start with the out breath is because if you are feeling really anxious, it's kind of hard to get a deep breath in. So sometimes I think it's harder to tell somebody who's actually feeling it in the moment to take a deep breath. So the active ingredients of this is that the exhale, that long, slow exhale, actually activates the brakes in the body. It helps the parasympathetic nervous system come online, right? We talked about that. And it resets the brain and body and allows the body to metabolize stress arousal. So the other thing I always think about when I'm doing this slide, yes, absolutely, secondhand trauma that teachers have experienced and don't even recognize that they have, absolutely. So belly breathing is a way to help metabolize that stress in the moment, right? It's a way to help keep your rider on your horse. The other thing I always think about when I do this one is smoking. I'm sure that no one here smokes because we all know that it's not good for us. But if you know somebody who smokes, this could be useful to you. So smokers will tell you that smoking helps them feel calm, helps them to calm down. And I'm not negating the fact that there are chemicals in cigarettes and that there are things and it's addictive and all that other stuff. However, what is it that smokers do? Right? They take these long, slow breaths in and out for 5 minutes at a time, 20 times a day, right? 20 breaks a day. That's how many cigarettes there are in a pack of cigarettes. That's because that's the average number that people smoke. 20 times a day, they are taking those long, slow breaths. So, again, I'm not negating that there's chemicals in cigarettes. But if you know someone, but I believe that this has to assist in the feeling of calm, right? So if you know somebody who smokes is trying to quit smoking, tell them, go take your smoke breaks the same way you normally would, just without the cigarette, and do the for 5 minutes, as it'll probably help them to feel calmer. All right. This is our second principle, practicing cultural humility responsiveness. I'm sure from the title you can see that we could spend weeks on this. I'm not going to spend weeks on it. I'm going to spend just a few slides because it's something that we do consider important, but today we're not going to focus on that. So what we talk about a lot is creating a shared culture. The thing about people is that we're all different, right? We come from different cultural groups that experience different traumas and different stressors. We respond differently to different things, and there are discrepancies in our responses and our strategies and supports. And so when we understand those differences, we can help come to a common understanding. So the story that Joyce always tells, which I'm just going to co-opt here, is about her working with Lynn Dolce. And so Lynn Dolce comes from an Italian family, and she talks with her hands and can be very animated when she's having a conversation. And if she's having a disagreement or a discussion about something, she can be very animated and maybe even talk louder than normally. And Joyce, on the other hand, comes from a Filipino family, and she tends to be much more quiet and much more calm sounding. And so even if she's having a discussion where she's having a disagreement, she's likely to be quite quiet. And so the two of them work together and we used to work together and have a great working relationship. But if they're stressed out, they both go back to their cultural centers, their own personal cultural centers, right? And so they might reach a point where if Lynn is talking and gesturing with her hands, Joyce starts feeling like, why is she yelling at me? I don't understand why she's so upset. Or if Joyce is being really quiet and reserved, Lynn could be thinking, why is she not talking to me about this? I feel like she should be saying something, right? They have a shared culture where they've agreed on this, but if they're both stressed out, they might have more difficulty with that. In schools, we have shared cultures that we create also. So when we have things around meeting times, around being on time, around having one mic, around step up, step back, all those things that we talk about around for meeting, what do we call those? Meeting agreements, right? However, if everyone's stressed out, it's a lot harder to stick with those agreements. Culture of humility is not something that it's not a concept that we somehow reach. It's a process of continual reflection, right? It's about communal reflection, self-awareness, openness to new ideas. This is really a lifelong learning thing. We recognize and try to change power imbalances, and we develop institutional accountability. All right, so addressing trauma is really about equity. All right, establishing safety and predictability. Well, then I have a note about that. Trauma and it has unpredictability and violates our physical, social, and emotional safety, which results in a sense of threat and a need to manage risks. So when we increase predictability in our lives and the lives of our students, we have those core safety needs met. We can minimize stress reactions and allow us to focus our resources on learning, wellness, and growth. Starting with a community-wide strategy, we have to establish a safe learning environment because we cannot shift from survival brain to learning brain if we don't feel safe. Again, when we think about Arvin entering the classroom, he didn't feel safe. It was not the teacher's fault or the school's fault that he didn't feel safe. But in that moment, he didn't feel safe, and so he wasn't going to be able to learn even if he had made it to his seat without having any negative interactions. And that's true for all of us. I remember when I was at El Dorado, a shooting happened. Not here, I can't think of now which shooting it was, but there was a shooting happened in the school, and the teachers were all really upset about it, understandably. And there was a meeting, and they called together a full staff meeting, and everybody sat down to talk, and it went on, and people were really pretty much off their horses, right? This thing had happened in a school not far away. And so the conversation went on something like 2 hours. It really went on a long time. And I could tell that the leadership was starting to feel kind of frustrated, like, I can't fix this. There's nothing I can do about this incident, right? Until finally, one of the teachers said, why is it that the front door isn't locked? It's supposed to be locked. It's always unlocked. Whenever I come, it's always unlocked. And the principal was able to say, oh, well, that's something, she could do something about that, right? And so she said, oh, we'll make sure that we stick to the policy. It used to always be locked, and I'll find out why it's not locked now, and I'll go back to that and make sure that the thing stays locked. And you could actually feel it in the room as she was making that decision and saying it to everyone. You could feel the tension kind of just dip in the room. It did not solve all the problems, and it certainly didn't change the fact that something really bad had happened nearby, but it helped people to feel safer in their environment, that she would take the time, that she would do the thing, that the doors would get locked. We talk a lot about primary prevention, right? Those 16 proactive classroom management strategies, ongoing training for staff, and ongoing training and consultation. We talk about restorative practices as well as trauma-informed practices. And we also talk a ton about brain breaks. So the deep breath that I gave you is just a simple one, but there are many, many different kinds of brain breaks that we can do. How many people have heard of Go Noodle? GoNoodle.com. They have a ton of brain breaks listed there. They have a bunch of fun videos. I don't always know that I think that the videos are great to show to kids, but I think that it's great for teachers and administrators and people to go and look at the site and maybe take some of those brain breaks back and demonstrate them and teach them to your kids on your own. And then also restorative practices, which I think really it's done amazing things in the list of the 16 strategies. You can actually probably just Google it, but I might be able to find it for you if we can add that later. So restorative practices really is a way to help people, well, it's about building community, right? And then it's also about resolving conflict within that community. And I feel like whenever we have even children growing up in the healthiest, most perfect, idyllic circumstances, don't get taught about how to resolve conflict. So if parents argue, when parents argue, because parents argue, right? When parents argue in front of children, even though people always say, I never argue in front of my kids. Kids always hear those arguments. Okay, let me just back that up. Kids don't always hear the arguments, but the kids frequently hear arguments between their parents. They rarely, though, hear the makeup, because the makeup doesn't usually happen in that moment. So if the argument happens as they're coming in from the house, as they're preparing dinner, as they're getting kids ready for bed, the makeup usually happens after the kids are in bed, or maybe when the parents are going to bed, where people are able to have taken a breath and able to say to each other, okay, maybe that was maybe I was upset about something else and I apologize, or I was really stressed out about my drive home, or whatever those things are. And so when you give kids a way to do that, kids really, they will go for it. We had a first grade pair of little girls came in one time to the wellness center off the playground holding hands, and they came in, and one little girl said, a little scowl on her face, she said, we need to talk it out, which is what we call the restorative practices conflict part, resolution part. And so we said, okay, and the social worker took them to the talk it out corner, and they sat down, and they went through the questions, right, what happened, who was harmed, the questions, you know what the questions are, or you can find them. And so the first little girl said, well, her took my ball, and I was playing with it, and her took it, and I wouldn't play with us, I wouldn't give the ball back. And then the second little girl, when she got her chance to say it, she said, well, I didn't know that they were playing with the ball. And when they got to the part where they asked, how can we make it as right as possible, the little girl who was harmed, the girl who had the ball taken from her, said, oh, we could all play together with the ball. And they, hugged each other and went back out to the playground. And somebody in the room, there was a bunch of us there, it must have been, we had just had a meeting or something, and someone said, she was totally lying. The girl who said, I didn't know they were playing with that ball. And she could have been, it's possible, but it really doesn't matter. What matters is they managed to have the conversation and go back out and play together with the ball, right? All right, so really what's important is helping everybody keep their rider on their horse, right? And so sometimes you need a ladder. Sometimes you need somebody to help you get your foot over the edge. Sometimes you need someone to hold the horse still, right? And so whatever it takes to help our kids get their riders on their horses or keep their riders on their horses, and our teachers, these are the things that we want to do. All right, fostering compassionate and dependable relationships. Okay. When you see these pictures, how does that make you feel? And what does it make you want to do with your body? I'll wait. Right, we want to hold them. I want to bounce. Right, we want to pick them up. And in a perfect caregiving situation, that's what happens. The baby is crying. The caregiver picks the baby up, right? Maybe gives them a little bounce, tells them it's going to be okay. And when the caregiver is calm and everything's working well, the baby actually borrows that regulation from the parent, right? We call this co-regulation. The baby is actually borrowing that calm from the parent. Now, let's pretend this is a healthy caregiving situation and the baby is hungry, not starving. The baby's hungry, starts to cry, and the caregiver picks the baby up. Will the baby slow the crying? Not really, someone says. Pat? So my experience has been actually that when if it's a healthy caregiving situation and the baby's hungry, when you pick the baby up, they will start to slow. That's my experience. The baby's crying will start to slow. It doesn't stop, and if you don't get to a bottle immediately or quickly enough, then it will ramp back up again. But initially, it will start to slow because the baby believes that the next thing is coming, right? Because if you're in a healthy caregiving situation, they know that you are going to meet their needs, right? If, on the other hand, the caregiver picks the baby up after having got off the phone with a bill collector who's really, really on their last nerve and picks the baby up, not mad at the baby at all, but picks the baby up, the baby might not be calm then either. Oh, thank you very much. There are the 16 proactive strategies. The baby, it's because the baby is going to feel that stress, right? And the same way the baby is going to borrow the calm, the baby will also borrow the stress, that feeling of anxiety. But it's not just about babies. All of us need co-regulators. So when you have a terrible day at work and you get into your car and you get on the phone and you call a person and you say, oh my gosh, I had the worst day ever, this happened and this happened and this happened, and the other person says, oh, that sounds terrible, I would hate if that happened to me, right? And that helps us to feel a little better. What happens if you've had a terrible day at work and you arrive home and your partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, mother, father, sister, whoever that is, also has had a terrible day? It doesn't work out quite as well, right? You had a terrible day, but what was the day I had, right? So we want to think about, just for a moment, the people that you have at your schools who help you with co-regulating. Just for a moment, think about that, because it's really important. We spend a lot of hours in the building, and if we don't have co-regulators on the ground with us, that will make your day longer and harder. So we're hardwired for connection. This over here is the vagal nervous system, right? And you'll see that it's connected up to a bunch of organs in your body. So when people tell you things like, I could feel it in my stomach, that's a real thing. Some people call it the nerve of compassion, the vagal nervous system. It involves the vocal cords. It slows our breathing and heart rate. We can recognize a feeling of connection in our gut. So one of the essential ingredients in a positive, healthy relationship is attunement. So humans are hardwired for connection. This is the Harlow monkey experiments. Do people remember the Harlow monkey experiments or hearing about them? So there was a fuzzy monkey over here on the left who was warm and fuzzy and had a face, and then this monkey over here, well, okay, it's not a monkey, but this mommy monkey had a milk bottle usually attached. This is from the early on in the experiment. These are really horrible pictures, but so what happened was that the baby monkey would come over here to get fed just enough and then rush back over to the warm, fuzzy monkey mommy, right? In fact, it's such that the baby became malnourished because it wanted to spend time here instead of here. Okay, so now back to where I was. One of the essential ingredients in a healthy, positive relationship is this attunement. So feeling like the other person understands you, sees you, and not just when we're happy, right? But attunement was when we're feeling sad also. Strong relationships are a fundamental cornerstone to school success. Emotionally warm, sensitive teachers had students with a greater growth in math and reading ability. Not teachers with the best curriculum, not teachers with the best scores, not best scores, with the best, Pinterest walls, right? But the warm, sensitive teachers had students with the greatest growth in math and reading ability. One of the strongest predictors of academic success is a student's perception of, who will guess what the answer is there? The student's perception of, yes, his teacher, if the teacher likes him or her, right? So I feel like we hear this a lot when kids say, thank you for answering, when kids say, that teacher doesn't like me, right? And what do we say as adults? We say things like, oh, of course they do, or it doesn't matter, right? And yet it does matter. It matters a lot. And so when we're thinking about this, I just want to spend a moment here, because when a kid comes to you and says, my teacher doesn't like me, then we want to stay with them in that moment. We want to help the kid feel heard. We want to say, how can you tell, right? And then we want to eventually circle back to the teacher. So if it's our child, we want to have a meeting with the teacher, or if it's something that's happening in a school building, it might not be us, it might be someone else, it might be the administrator needs to do the circle back, but someone needs to circle back to the teacher so the teacher can understand how they're being perceived and find a way to help build that relationship, because your kids are going to do better if they believe that the teacher likes them. I don't know how many people have seen the Rita Pearson video, but in the video she talks about, she says, are you going to like all your kids? Of course not, but they can never know, right? So that's important. Yes, they can tell for sure. So then we want to find ways to build that relationship. I don't think it'll surprise anyone to know that complex trauma interferes with co-regulation. So when you've had, if the child's caregiver is the source of the trauma or is unable to provide that co-regulation, the development of emotional regulation skills can be derailed. And this can affect relationships into adulthood. So sometimes you have a kid and you're used to being able to connect really easily with children, and then you find one kid that it feels like it's harder and harder to make that connection. You know, there are things that we can do to kind of get around that. There are kind of ways that we can build that relationship to help support the child in the development of that. And you can make a difference, right? So there are, this is from Chandra Ghosh Ippen, so she talks about there are big I interventions, so things like therapy and social skills groups and all the other things that we do, interventions, but then there are little I interactions. Every positive attuned interaction with a trustworthy other helps build new relationships, helps build new connections in the brain, right? So pattern repetitive stimuli helps to rewire the brain. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make a new groove on that record, right? A compassion groove, a caring groove, a school is a place for me kind of groove. All right, thank you. That's the Rita Pierson TED Talk for you to watch at your leisure. So this next principle is promote resilience and social emotional learning. We want to build student skills to address these hidden injuries. So if you imagine that you have a kid who's been in a car accident and has 2 broken legs, is sitting at the bottom of a set of stairs in a wheelchair, no amount of sticker charts or coercion or yelling or candy bars is going to help them get to the top of the stairs. What they need to get to the top of the stairs is a ramp, right? We're not saying that these kids that we don't want kids to have, we don't want to have high expectations for our kids, but that we want to be able to provide the things that they need to address these hidden injuries. We have scaffolding, skill building, supports. We want to underscore strengths and progress and improvement. That's from Ross Green. Oh, there it is. Okay, we want to create these conditions that are good for learning, right? So if we're trying to create a learning thinking brain, we're trying to keep everything engaged and ready to go, the first thing that a kid needs to be able to do that is some self-regulation. And in the classroom, they get that self-regulation maybe from their teacher, right, in the form of co-regulation. So now you have the teacher, and the teacher, to be able to have the thinking, learning brain engaged, needs to have self-regulation. And then the teacher might need help with the self-regulation from a co-regulator, someone else, maybe a grade level partner, maybe the principal, maybe the social worker. And then that person needs self-regulation, right? The idea is that all of us need it. Oh, here's my thing. All of us need this at one time or another, right? So on great days, we're feeling really good. We maybe have a good handle on our self-regulation, but we still have a place that we go to get that co-regulation. It is definitely too bad that they've eliminated social-emotional learning and positive classroom management. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about teacher training programs, that they have eliminated that. That's sad. That's sad because there's a ton of data that talks about how social-emotional learning increases learning. All right. So facilitating empowerment and collaboration. Trauma involves a loss of power and control that can make us feel helpless and hopeless. So if we unintentionally or unnecessarily disempower someone, we're taking away their voice and choice, we may be inadvertently re-traumatizing them. We want to help kids have meaningful opportunities to choose and have which can be an important component of healing. All right, so this is the slide I meant to have up when I said the other thing. Trauma involves a loss of power and control that can make us feel hopeless and helpless. So this is an image from 9/11. There's happening in the background. These people are running away. And so the people that are running away and the people also that are in this building over here and this building over here are all having that same feeling. They're all having a, right? Okay, not all of them, but most of them, many of them. And so what happened on that day was that New York City officials told everybody by radio and television, if you're in the vicinity, stay put. If you're in a building nearby, stay put. The last thing they wanted was 1 million people to rush out into the streets, freaked out, right? So some people that were already on the streets ran and did their thing, and some people in these buildings, for instance, were made to sit still, to stay where they were. And so what happened for the people here you see running is that they ran a certain distance, and at some point were able to stop and turn around and say, I did it. I made it. I ran away from the dangerous, bad thing, right? The people that were made to sit still in these buildings didn't have that opportunity, right? They had the same feeling, but they were unable to use that feeling to do something with that feeling, right, to metabolize that stress. And so the data on the health outcomes for people in the building versus the people on the ground running here is actually worse for the people in the building, right? More days of work absence, more days of mental health problems, more instances of physical health problems, right? And some of it's because they were close and maybe they were breathing the air and all those other things. But some of it is also based on the fact that they did not have an opportunity to do something with that stress in the moment. So we want to be able to provide kids with opportunities to do something with the stress in their bodies. So at the beginning I told you that I do this because of my own personal experiences in school, and that's true. It's also true that if you had asked me 10 years ago what I really wanted to do, I would have said to change the world. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about one of the kids that we've worked with before. So there was a kid that I was working with who was what we called a high flyer. It was a kid with a lot of behavioral challenges, the kind of kid who was out of control and would melt down and throw things and tip over tables. And I worked with this kid. There were things that we did at the school. There were systemic changes at the school. There was a wellness center. There were restorative practices was in full force at that time. And so this was a kid who would tell the people closest to him that he hated you. Like, this was a kid who really was having some serious struggles. And one day in the second year that I was at El Dorado in the Wellness Center, where I think, again, we had just come out of a meeting, and the door flung open, bang, against the wall, you know, and in walked this kid. And everyone kind of looked at me because this kid was sort of my kid. This was the kid that I was working with. And because this was not really how to enter the Wellness Center, and they weren't really supposed to come in because the Wellness Center was closed at that time. Anyway, this child walked into the room and kind of walked past all of us, and I was kind of like, hey, so what's going on? And he just kept walking. So just a minute, walked right past me into the cool-down corner, picked up a squeezy, some kind of a calming object, right, and then turned around and started walking back out again. And I was kind of like, hey, so everybody's still looking at me, and I'm kind of like, oh, so, you know, you're not supposed to, and off he goes out the door. He said, and just went back out the door, and we all were like, wow, what was that about? And about 2 minutes later, the door opened again, this time much more reasonably softly. The door opens, and in comes this kid with a little girl who's clearly in distress, crying. She now has the squeezy in her hand, and he has his hand on her back, kind of, and escorts her into the room and says, here now, these people will help you. And then turns and says, okay, see you later, and runs out the door and goes back out to the playground, right? So this was a kid who really, really, this was a huge step for this kid, and it warmed all of us, our hearts, to see him helping someone else in a moment of distress, and that's how we are changing the world, just one kid at a time. That is the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Martha. I do want to let everybody know that there are time for questions. As Martha mentioned, there was no way to present any of these, pieces in depth, but we did make sure to leave enough time so if there's some pieces you'd like to hear a little bit more about, we do have a few minutes, and we also will have, before we say goodbye, we'll have a quick evaluation that we would ask you to submit as well, and it's only a few questions, as you know. But in any case, I do want to encourage folks to write in chat if there's something else they'd like to hear a little bit more about. It may take you a minute. If you're like me, you're overwhelmed with that last story. That always gets me. Thank you, Martha.
Yes. You're totally welcome. Mhm. There it is.
So it looks like we have a question from Pat. Can you explain more about the program you work for? Are you with UCSF or SFUSD?
So right now I'm on, so actually both times, I'm an employee of UCSF. The initial work that I did under Hearts was grant funded, and that would be it was funded by Meta Fund and money from the Pritzker Family Fund, SF Department of Children, Youth, and Families. So these are the people that funded the grant the first time around. And now I'm on a new grant, which is called Project Prevent, and that is a grant that SFUSD wrote but the money comes from the Department of Education. So it's a federal grant. There are, I think, 20 maybe, or maybe 23 places around the country that get Project Prevent grants, each of them trying to address the effects of trauma on and in schools. And so technically I'm an employee of UCSF, but I do all of my work in these 7 Bayview schools right now. I don't have the PowerPoint, but you were given the handout. So the handout has the slides, most of the slides, and notes on the side of each slide because the slides are mostly pictures, and so they're not actually all that useful by themselves, but the notes are there that says something like what I was saying. There it is there above your comment. There's a link.
Okay, so I want to make sure, again, you can see Martha's information there, and folks are welcome to contact Martha directly. As we mentioned in the beginning, we will have this archived on our webinar or on our website so that you can share it with others if you would like to after the fact. So just wait a month or so and it will be up there. And I want to thank everyone for attending, and thank you, Martha, especially for this very valuable presentation. It's wonderful, and I hope schools will explore this some more because there's a lot that can be done even without the grant funding. There's definitely some very valuable information to take from this. So thank you all to everyone. We're going to quickly put up the evaluation survey and wish you all a good day for the rest of the day. Hopefully not so stressful. All right. Thank you, everyone.